are they the sort of thing you're going to be able to do ongoing and forever? And if you think to yourself, yeah, well, am I honestly going to be able to restrict carbohydrates and do the carnivore diet forever? Maybe not. If so, I would suggest that's not going to be the best approach for you. Hello and welcome to the Smart Strength Training Podcast. This is podcast episode 30, and it is the first podcast episode of 2025. So happy new year. I hope you had a wonderful festive period. So today's episode, I'm actually going to do a little bit of an overview of some of the podcasts that I did last year, because it's the new year. People are going to come into the new year with some goals. And one of those goals, or one of the goals that centers very, very high in people's New Year's resolutions, is, of course, fat loss, weight loss, positive body composition change. So I want to use this podcast as a little bit of a blueprint of things to consider when you're going to come into a weight loss phase to make sure that you are successful with it. So first up, we're going to talk about setting the right goal. I strongly advise against setting a weight loss goal. In fact, I would say the mindset around I want to lose weight needs to change. You don't want to lose weight, or I would suggest you don't just want to lose weight. Do you really care about losing 5 kilos, or do you care about staying 5 kilos lighter ongoing? Because if it's the latter, then how you lose that weight really matters. Because recognizing that what you do to be a heavier framed human being can't be replicated to become lighter. So you want to make sure that what you're doing has that long-term focus of staying weight stable. So maintenance of the weight lost is the goal. That being said, let's say you did lose, you were 75 kilos, you come down to 65 kilos. It's not about staying 65 kilos. You have to recognize that no one's body weight stays fixed. So it's more about a dynamic range to work from. So you might end up being 63 to 67 kilos and sort of like going up and down in that dynamic range. But the mindset needs to shift away from the weight loss to the weight stable at the end of that weight loss phase. So therefore, it has to be sustainable what you do. You have to choose nutritional practices that you can stick to ongoing. And that is the second point. So this idea of sustainable nutrition practice. So any kind of diet trend out there that is centered around restriction probably needs to be something to be cautious of. So like popular trends like the carnivore diet, the keto diet, or even old school things like Slimming World and Weight Watchers, are they the sort of thing you're going to be able to do ongoing and forever? And if you think to yourself, yeah, well, am I honestly going to be able to restrict carbohydrates and do the carnivore diet forever? Maybe not. If so, I would suggest that's not going to be the best approach for you. By all means, you can take elements of these diets. You can shift your nutrition practice in a direction of something that's a little bit more plant-based or a little bit more carnivore. But going all in and making it very unsustainable could be a major, major issue, because sustainability needs to center around good quality habits that you can maintain indefinitely. So sustainability is key. A diet phase is intentional. It's a focused period of time where you're trying to lower your caloric intake. Hopefully, we are all on board with understanding that an energy deficit, so a reduction in calories consumed per day, and then averaged out over a sustained period of time, is what we need. So if you go and download MyFitnessPal and put your details into it, it will just churn out a deficit for you. I don't think that's a very useful piece of information by itself. I think it can be quite useful to know how that information is generated. So in the summary, in the copy beneath the podcast notes, the show notes, I'm going to put the Vincent equation for men and for women. So this is an equation where you can put in your details and you can estimate your basal metabolic rate, so your BMR. So why that's really important to know is based on your BMR, you can then adjust for your activity levels or a estimated activity level to calculate your total daily energy expenditure, your TDEE, which is effectively your maintenance calories, the amount of calories your body needs at rest to sustain your body weight. This is a estimate. That's always the same for any calculator. And I think it's useful to go through regardless if you intend to track. I think it's nice to see where these numbers come from. It can also be really useful if you see that the number is, you haven't got to track calories to have an appreciation of energy composition of food. If you know that you're looking to eat around 1,800 calories per day, but you don't want to track, I think at least knowing 1,800 calories is what you're trying to shoot for can be quite helpful. Because if you're going to have a lunch and it looks like it's coming in at 1,200 calories because you can see on the menu, then you can make a decision around what you're going to choose. Or if you're cooking at home and you recognize, oh, I've got like the 20% beef and I've got the 5% beef, and I can see how much more energy is in one compared to the other. And there's that conversation around, well, one tastes nicer than the other, but you can ask yourself, is the trade-off in energy worth the taste? And then you can make smart, informed decisions around that. So I do still think there can be a nice middle ground to be found where you understand and recognize calories, but you're not tracking them and you're not necessarily using any kind of app to do that. So going back to what I said, you use the calculation to to calculate your BMR. You do an adjustment for your day's activity. That will give you your total day energy expenditure. And the idea then is you need to be in an energy deficit. So you have to be below that. So you can either just take 500 calories off the number that generates, or you can just bring it down by about 20% and do the math on that. And the reason for this is if you can create a 3,500 calorie deficit per week, so a 500 calorie deficit per day, that will yield approximately a pound of fat loss per week, or roughly 0.5 kilos. You might want to go a bit harder and be more aggressive than a pound per week, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at. But also, I think it's quite nice to see where these numbers come from rather than the app just generates it for you. Because if you're going through an app and you put in it your weight loss goal and the time frame you intend to lose it from, you won't see the amount of deficit it puts in. It just churns out a number. So by doing it the way I just said, you can say, right, well, I reckon I could go a bit lower than 500 calories to see a bit quicker weight loss than a pound per week. But at least you're making that decision with your eyes open rather than it kind of happening back end in an app, which I think is often the problem. Next up is to plan out your weight loss phase, which actually is something I covered on a very recent podcast episode. Go back to what I just said, a pound of fat loss per week. So I don't want you to have a fat loss goal, but I assume most people would by default roughly know how much weight-ish they'd like to lose. It might be 5 kilos, it might be 7 kilos. If you work off the basis I just said, a pound of fat or half a kilo of fat per week, you can roughly estimate how long this diet phase is going to last. I've said quite a few times in my podcast that anything over about 12 weeks of dieting, people struggle to sustain. And that is logical. 3 months of dieting, 3 months of thinking about food and making nutritional changes to reduce energy is a long period of time. So if you crunch the numbers and you see that you're looking at about a 6 month plus diet phase, I would strongly advise, rather than going at it twice as fast to try and lose the weight quicker, I would strongly advise breaking your diet phase up, maybe doing 3 months, then stabilize it for 3 months, then go back into a second phase of dieting again, which was discussed on a recent podcast episode. But I definitely think planning your weight loss phase can be smart. Once again, I would strongly advise to walk in, eyes open, recognizing the time frame it might take, recognizing what you're going to need to do to be successful. And if you need to have that period where you stabilize your body weight, then you can do that. Also understanding that the goal, remember at the very start I said you shouldn't have a weight loss goal, it should be a weight stable goal. So what's it matter if you do 3 months or 6 months staying weight stable? Let's say you lost 5 kilos, you stabilize that for 6 months and you lose another 5 kilos. On the grand scheme of things, considering the overall goal is weight stable, that shouldn't freak people out quite so much. So when it comes to the ins and outs of what diet you're going to do, that isn't for me to make statements around. That's for you to decide. Obviously, every single human being is different. The foods they like are different. You might have done different diets in the past that have worked really well, or you found easy to implement, and that's super important. You might want to orient your diet around that. So totally on board with that. But there are some key fundamentals I would suggest to stick to regardless of the overall nutritional strategy you're going to go at. First up is a high protein diet. So protein is great because it regulates satiety and hunger. So recognizing that hunger and managing hunger is going to be something that I have to have an awareness of. The longer you spend in an energy deficit, the more you're going to be battling hunger, which is one of the main reasons one of the reasons, that that diet phases beyond sort of 12-week people do start to struggle with. So high protein diet also is beneficial for retaining muscle tissue, recognizing you're under eating energy effectively, and your body can break proteins down, so muscle down, to fuel activity. So we don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that we're eating a diet high enough in protein plus resistance training, which we'll come to in a second, to make sure that we both manage hunger, but also for muscle retention. We then want to make sure that we center our diet around a fiber-rich food. So fruits, veggies, beans, and legumes, again, because it helps with satiety and appetite regulation. Also, protein and leaner source of protein, fruits and veggies, they also generally lean into quite high meal volume. So they are nutrient dense, but not always super calorie dense. You have to be careful, of course, with protein because you can have eggs or you can have very fatty cuts of red meat that would shoot the calories up. But thinking about when you're looking at a plate of food, because classic dieting approaches are like having a salad. The problem with having a salad, of course, is it's not going to be remotely satiating. So by being quote unquote good, all you've actually done is set yourself up for failure down the line because you're going to be hungry 2 hours later. So getting as many foods onto the plate that can fill you up is a really smart thing to do, which is why choosing nutrient dense over calorie dense is sensible. So I think most people can understand that 500 calories coming in from a slice of cake is going to look very different around meal volume when it comes to how much you can eat compared to a plate of food that's got some protein, some veggies, and some beans, legumes, and some quality complex carbohydrates on the plate. So that is important, but also you have to recognize that you don't want to be super, super restrictive. If your idea of dieting is limiting all the foods that you love, never allowing pizza, never allowing chocolate, never allowing a glass of wine, again, you think about it, it's got to go across 3 months, maybe 6 months. Are you setting yourself up for feeling like you've broken the diet, feeling guilty as you go through this? So is it not more sensible to allow some of those sorts of foods in? But you do, of course, then need to make sure that you manage portion control. And for some people, everything in moderation can work really well. For others, it doesn't work quite so well. So it's a tricky one to know the balance for. But again, think about this before you go into diet phase. How often or what sort of foods are you going to allow yourself to consume on a daily basis or a weekly basis to make sure this is sustainable? Is it not smarter to go at this a little bit slower so you can enjoy the process more, enjoy more the foods that you love, rather than going in and being very, very restrictive? Next up is one of the things that people say often is around fatigue, decision fatigue, or having to use willpower too much to make choices around nutrition. And that's a major problem. Again, if you think about it, if it's 3 months, 6 months, you don't want to have every single thing you do with nutrition to be very much front and center of your mind, always thinking about it. You want as many things on autopilot as possible. And to do that, it's really smart to focus on your environment. Where do you consume food most frequently? And are there simple things that you can change to that environment to make it more conducive to pick the right types of food? Is it not going to be really helpful if you open your fridge and it's basically easy to pick a high protein, like great veg sauce dish that you can make really easy? If that choice is easier than Deliveroo or whatever the alternative is in that moment in time, that can be really, really helpful. So a well-stocked pantry and fridge is great. Making sure you've got all the tools that you need to be successful. That could be Tupperware containers for meal prep and carry. It could be a blender. It's cold at the moment, so it could be something like a slow cooker. But that can be, that idea of modifying your environment can be very, very helpful. I also think a little bit of planning around meals can also go a long way. People are very good often at getting all their workouts in, and then they're not so good with getting their nutrition on point. And I'd often say to clients, like, I'd rather you missed a workout but allocated that hour for doing an online food shop and just roughly planning out what your meals are going to be that week. That can take away some of the decision fatigue that you're going to run into comes Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You need to monitor your progress. Of course, there's many ways to do that. Weighing in can be problematic for a lot of people. It can be very triggering. If you're going to weigh in, do it regularly, sort of 3 to 5 times per week. And then you're looking at the trends. So I would strongly advise to get it in some sort of app that you can look at a graph to see the trend overall. And then try and zoom out a little bit on the day-to-day fluctuations, because we know that no one, and I repeat that, no one is gaining a significant amount of body fat to the point that it is going to be measurable on home scales on a day-to-day or like 2 to 3 day period. Any fluctuation change in weight is going to be based on water, sugar, and stool. So if you find yourself being tripped up by weighing in, getting very overwhelming and very frustrating, then potentially that's not the smartest thing to do. So circumferences on photos every 2 to 4 weeks could be a really nice way to do that. But again, you do want to make sure that you've got something in place to measure it. And also just recognizing again that it is that long-term trend rather than short-term changes, because for women especially, the menstrual cycle will massively impact body weight throughout the month. So if you're finding your body weight numbers are tripping you up, then that's something to be mindful of, and maybe using body weight less frequently and going to something like photos and circumferences could be better. Let's talk exercise. Obviously, touched on it before, exercise is not massively important for weight loss. It's very, very important for favorable body composition. So by that I mean losing more fat and retaining more muscle tissue. And it's also essential when it comes to stabilizing body weight. And we go back to the very start, we said staying weight stable is the number one goal. So therefore exercise does then become super important. So I touched on during protein, we want to try and maintain and preserve muscle tissue at all cost. Muscle burns more energy at rest. So anything that can preserve muscle mass, recognizing that we're going to undereat effectively so the body can quite easily break down protein and use it as a fuel source. So we want to be resistance training between 2 to 3 times per week. I would just suggest full body workouts. Make sure you're focusing on progressive overload. Don't change your workouts too frequently. Spend 12 weeks doing the same workout, pushing hard, getting things going so you're quite close to your limit. Cardio, great. Obviously, it burns more energy per unit of time. We have to recognize that the energy balance equation is that the more calories you burn, the better. But of course, there is a big caveat to this, that if you do cardio and it disproportionately increases your hunger, then that is a major, major problem, because it's much easier to consume 1,000 calories than it is to burn 1,000 calories. So if you find by doing a spinning class or by ramping up your runs from 5Ks to 7Ks to 10Ks that you're absolutely ravenous on those training days, then maybe that's not the best approach during that intentional weight loss phase. Maybe doing more short, high intensity bursts like intervals added onto your resistance training days or as standalone sessions is better, but those would be much, much shorter. Literally 20 seconds all out, 20 seconds rest, repeated 8 to 10 times with a warm-up, cool-down, and mobility. So thinking about that, you have to always, you go back, and I've kind of listed this in what I consider the hierarchy of importance. You go back to the top, you want to make sure that what you do doesn't negatively affect hunger too much. Psychologically, set yourself up and prepare yourself for dips in mood and motivation, recognizing that weight is going to plateau or weight gain might even happen because body weight is not an accurate measure of fat loss. And that's always important to keep front and center of your mind. Water, sugar, and stool are going to be the things that mess you up when it comes to looking at scale weight. So don't put too much focus on the scale, and do expect maybe dips in motivation and mood throughout. Also, it's cold and miserable and dark. So just generally, it is the hardest time of the year to do that. And again, I just touched on that the menstrual cycle can affect things like water retention as well. So key takeaways. As I'm mindful, I've just gone over those things and sort of skimmed through each topic, but just to summarize at the end, it has to be sustainable. You have to focus on long-term habits rather than quick fixes. Be realistic over the time frame that you're going to be dieting for, because of the psychological implications and how resilient are you going to be 3 months into a diet phase, are you really going to be able to continue it? Make sure that protein and fiber and volume eating are at the forefront of your thinking to manage hunger. And hunger is your body's way of trying to maintain homeostasis. It knows you're not eating enough energy to sustain the rate of weight loss or the weight loss, and it will try and make you eat more. So you've got to have a strategy that focuses on what you're going to do to manage hunger. Adjust your environment to set yourself up for success. If meal prep is helpful, great, or planning nutrition, also great. Meal prep does not also mean like on a Sunday you put aside 3 hours to prep all your chicken for the week, like I sometimes see on social media. Meal prep can be simply throughout the course of the week, you could cook a spaghetti bolognese, you could cook a lasagna, and when you do that, you simply batch cook 2 of them, so therefore you have one in the fridge or one in the freezer that you can use later. So again, making sure that your environment is conducive to that is also really important. Make sure that you have something in place to monitor your progression, but that is not too triggering. So if you're doing something where, I don't know, a trainer's getting you to weigh in every week or Weight Watchers getting you to weigh in every week, and that mentally ruins you, that is not a smart way to do it ongoing. Make sure you incorporate resistance training into your routine to preserve lean muscle mass. But actually, just a caveat that staying active is the fundamentally most important thing. So yes, as a coach, as a strength training coach, I want you to do resistance training. I obviously have a bit of a bias towards that. But ultimately, just doing any kind of activity is going to be really important. So I hope that's a useful blueprint that you can use to think about your nutritional strategy coming into this new year. As I said, this is basically an overview of some of the topics I've already discussed through 2024. So if you're interested to dive deeper into topics of diet breaks or how to stabilize your body weight and to be a maintenance calories, all those things I have episodes on, so you can go back and listen to.